Hi everyone, AJ here from herfitnesssolutions.com. This is video number 2 in my blog about using the scale. In the previous video, I talked about how I don't want you to use the scale, which is if you do not want to use it, just completely avoid it at all costs. What I don't want to see people doing is using it sporadically with no other form of tracking. Basically just jumping on a scale whenever it's available at a friend's house and being really reactive to that number. I want you to avoid that at all costs. So the 2 ways to avoid that are by not using the scale at all or by learning how to use the scale properly. I have avoided the scale in my past. For me, that was my choice at the time. When I look back at that, I can say that I almost wish I had used it properly instead of not using it. But obviously, like my personal growth and where I was emotionally at that time, that wasn't what I did, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. But I do think had I learned to use it properly at that point, it probably would have benefited me greatly. So in this video, I'm going to talk about like the practical applications, and as far as like anyone that wants to read a little bit more about how water weight is reflected on the scale and how glycogen is stored in your muscles, I'm going to actually link you to some resources where you can learn more about that science. Okay, I'm not going to cover that in these videos. So let's go over some of the very, very basics. If you're going to use the scale to track, I strongly advise that that is not the only thing you use, and you can find other suggestions on my body composition page. So there you'll learn that the scale isn't going to actually provide you with a change in body composition. That would be if you're actually losing fat or gaining muscle. The scale reading won't tell you that. But it is good for a lot of other reasons, and that's why I suggest combining tracking tools. For myself, I take girth measurements. I do have my body composition read with calipers every so often whenever I can find or get back to the person that used to do it for me all the time in the city. Other things I use are pictures. So I use calipers for body composition, girths, pictures, scale. That's pretty much what I do. And of course, I mean, I think how your clothes fits, that might be a tool someone uses on a very regular basis. They might have like one pair of favorite pants that they're trying to fit back into or just be comfortable in. And that's cool. I think that's something that whether we know it or not, we're actually taking in every day when we get dressed. So I think that happens, but it's good to actually set aside a pair of pants that you want to use as a tool, and that's fine too. So time of day, I usually track in the morning. First thing when I get up. You will notice once you start to use the scale that it will fluctuate throughout the day, and that is not fat gain. That is purely water retention or water loss. It depends. I'm kind of a unique scenario because I'm always experimenting with my nutrition protocols and training, so I probably jump on the scale a little bit more often than I would ever advise a lot of my clients do. But bi-weekly is a good idea, and definitely monthly. But you want to make sure that you're on a schedule, and I'm going to get into why. So us women, we have a lot of hormones that fluctuate throughout the month, and you will see that at certain stages of the month, you will retain water, okay? So you don't want to be comparing progress. Not that the scale is a good sign of progress, but you just don't want to be making comparisons with a reading that you took when you were PMS compared to a reading that you took after your period has stopped, because there's going to be a huge difference there just from water retention. To give you an idea, when I was heavier, my weight fluctuation throughout my menstrual cycle would be like 7 pounds. That's pretty big difference, right? So if you were to take a reading and you were oblivious to when it was in your cycle, if you were to take that reading after your period and you weighed, let's say, 140 pounds, and then without really understanding where you were in your cycle, the next month you just randomly weighed in and you were almost 150 pounds, that might be quite devastating if you've been dieting and exercising properly, and you might understand that number. Had you been tracking your cycle, you might be able to see the pattern that, hey, guess what? Every time I ovulate, so women are different. For me, it's actually when I ovulate, that's when I'll retain the most water. But it might be just right before your period. So you just want to have some kind of tracking. I use my iPhone to track my period. I use, it's called iPeriod. Just be aware of where you are in your cycle, and don't be emotional when you see the number on the scale, because that's going to be factored into your menstrual cycle. So have a look at that number, track. And this is why I say try to do it all the time at like do it monthly. So if you're going to track your weight after your period, then do it every month after your period, okay? And just be aware of that. You're going to see, oh, it's really interesting. Every time I ovulate, I go up about 3 pounds, regardless of whatever else I'm doing. So I'm aware of that, and I give myself grace during that time. I know that's normal. I'm not having a emotional reaction to that number, because I know that that's my pattern. This is where I'm talking about learning it and learning your body and seeing how things fluctuate throughout the month and even throughout the day. Okay, so we talked about same time of day, keeping on a bi-weekly or monthly schedule, so you're making sure that there's no major variances there as far as monthly hormonal cycles. Using other tools, okay, covered that. I made some notes here because I didn't want to miss anything. And then the last thing, of course, is carbohydrate consumption. This is where I'm actually going to provide you some more reading in some links that I'll attach in this blog. That will get into a little bit more detail. I don't really need to make a super long video about this, but another awareness that you need to have is that carbohydrates are stored in muscle and liver as glycogen. And for every gram of glycogen stored, you store about 3 to 4 grams of water. And this is where a lot of, you'll hear people talk about, oh, it's just water weight. Absolutely. This is why if you start a very low carbohydrate diet and you drop tons of weight in the beginning, that might be a reflection of glycogen depletion and water depletion, right? So it works the other way too. If you're on a very low carb diet where you're cycling carbohydrates, it could be weekly, it could be post-training, it varies for different people. But you will want to see how that carbohydrate cycling affects the scale. Just another way of understanding how the scale is going to change based on other things. For myself, I use carb backloading. My weight fluctuates about 3 to 4 pounds. It's about 3 pounds regularly, okay? And that's given, when I ovulate, it will be on the higher end of those numbers. And then also, like if I have a big refeed and I've consumed a lot of carbohydrate, then of course my weight is going to be on that higher end. And what you'll learn to see is that you can manipulate that quite easily with your nutrition and hydration levels. And if you're working within those numbers, that's kind of like your sweet spot. You want to use that to manipulate your nutrition, and basically know that within that range, wherever you find yourself, it's going to change at certain times as your weight decreases, or maybe it's increasing because you're putting on muscle mass. You're just going to find that there's going to be a range that you're going to work in that you're going to probably be able to manipulate quite easily throughout the week. And that's fine to be in that range. In that range that you have, you're not looking at fat gain, okay? When you're seeing those numbers change, you're not seeing fat gain or fat loss on the scale. And that's what you need to keep in mind. Like I said, I'm going to provide you some more reading because I don't want, this video's already gone on almost 10 minutes, so I don't want to go on any longer. I'm just trying to give you some examples here of how I use the scale to detach emotion from it and actually understand what's going on in my body and how that is reflected in the number. And you will see that as your body composition changes, the scale is not really the best reflection of that, okay? If you are losing fat and increasing lean muscle mass because you're new to exercising and eating properly, really track your girth measurements and your progress pictures, because the scale is probably going to be a pretty crummy tool. But that being said, if you learn that and experience that and know how to use it, it's just another tool that you can use to your benefit. All right, I hope this helps some of you. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me.